Imagine preparing for one of the happiest days of your life, your best friend's wedding. The excitement in the air, the joy of celebration. And then, in the middle of it all, you receive a text. But this isn't any ordinary message. It's a divorce notice. A cold, heartless notification that will shatter everything you thought you knew about love and loyalty. How could this happen? Why would he do this to me? Let me take you through that moment. Before we dive into today's story, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an amazing story. And if you're already part of the family, thank you for being here. Let's get started with today's incredible journey. I still remember that day vividly, as if it was just yesterday. The excitement, the nerves, and the joy of being a part of my best friend's wedding. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. We had been friends for years, sharing memories, tears, and laughter. This wedding was supposed to be a celebration, a testament to the love she had found, a love I was happy to witness. As I prepared for the event, the air was filled with the buzz of excitement. I was looking forward to seeing her walk down the aisle, her smile radiating as she started a new chapter in her life. But little did I know, while I was slipping on my dress and checking my phone one last time before leaving for the ceremony, something unimaginable was about to happen. As I glanced at my phone expecting a message about the wedding details or a quick check-in from a family member, my eyes fell on something that made my heart stop. An unexpected text message from my husband. The words on the screen were as cold and heartless as the numbness I felt seep through me. "I think it's over. I'm done." It was followed by a simple, "I'm divorcing you." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process it. How could he do this to me? How could he drop such a bombshell while I was on my way to my best friend's wedding? There, in that moment, surrounded by excitement and celebration, I was hit with the crushing reality that my marriage was falling apart. The joy I had felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching shock that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about love, commitment, and the man I had spent years with. I was shaking, unsure of what to do next. My heart ached as the weight of the message sank in, leaving me with a hollow feeling I couldn't escape. How could someone I trusted so deeply treat me like this? The confusion and disbelief were overpowering. I had to process the unthinkable while still pretending to be okay for the wedding. The emotional toll was immense. How could I go from witnessing love to feeling so utterly betrayed in an instant? This was the beginning of an emotional roller coaster, one I never expected to find myself on. The text that shattered my world was only the beginning of the heartache that would follow. The first few moments after reading that text were a blur. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. How could I be receiving a divorce text while I was heading to celebrate someone else's wedding? It didn't make sense. I kept rereading the words, hoping they would somehow change or I'd wake up from some terrible nightmare. But it was real. My mind raced as I tried to process everything. I was filled with a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, anger, disbelief, and above all, a deep, aching sadness. Was this really happening? How could he do this to me? We had built a life together, shared our dreams, our plans for the future. And now, in a text message, he was telling me it was all over. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. In a daze, I stepped out of the car and into the wedding venue. The sounds of laughter and music, the clinking of glasses, and the smiles of familiar faces all seemed so distant. It was as if I was in another world. Here I was, surrounded by people celebrating the love of two people starting their lives together, and I was grappling with the end of my own. I couldn't help but wonder, how long had he been feeling this way? Was this sudden decision truly his, or had something been brewing for a while? I had no answers, only questions that burned in my mind. I tried to call him, hoping he would explain himself, but my calls went unanswered. Was this the end? Was this really how he wanted it to be? No conversations, no closure, just a final cruel message sent with no consideration for the woman he had once promised to love and cherish. as I stood there in the middle of the wedding, pretending to be happy for my best friend. I couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling of betrayal. I watched as she laughed, danced, and celebrated with her new husband, and yet all I could think about was the devastation I was experiencing. My own happiness felt so insignificant in that moment. I wasn't just attending a wedding. I was trying to hold myself together in the face of an emotional crisis that no one, especially not my closest friends, could ever understand. The wedding wasn't about love anymore. It was a painful reminder of the life I thought I had. I wanted to be happy for my friend, but how could I when my own life was crumbling? I looked at the bride, glowing with joy, and felt a mix of envy and heartbreak. She had everything I wanted, everything I thought I had. I felt so small, so invisible in the midst of her happiness. The contrast was unbearable, and yet I had to pretend. I tried to talk to people, to make small talk, to laugh, but every moment felt like I was wearing a mask. My mind was in turmoil. It was a painful paradox, surrounded by people, yet feeling more alone than I ever had before. As the evening went on, the texts and calls I had hoped for never came. He didn't reach out to explain or apologize. There was no recognition of the pain he had caused. It was as if he had made his decision, and that was the end of it. The night ended, but the storm inside me continued. I returned home, numb and exhausted, my mind swirling with unanswered questions and the overwhelming sense of loss. How do you move forward when everything you thought you knew has been ripped away in an instant? The following days were a blur of emotions. I couldn't stop replaying that moment over and over again in my head. The text message, the coldness, the suddenness of it all. It felt surreal, like I was stuck in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I had never felt more abandoned or betrayed in my life. How could he do this to me? How could someone who had vowed to love me forever just throw it all away with a single message? I thought about our marriage, the years we had spent together, the memories we had created, the plans we had made. We were supposed to grow old together, weren't we? I had believed that. But now, all of it seemed meaningless. His words, "I'm done," echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but feel the sting of rejection in every corner of my heart. I tried to reach out to him, of course. I called. I texted. But the responses I received were short, emotionless, and dismissive. He had made his decision, and there was nothing I could do to change it. The man I had shared my life with, the man I thought I knew, had turned into someone unrecognizable in a matter of hours. The anger I felt was overwhelming. How could he be so indifferent? How could he do something so heartless without even having the decency to talk to me face to face? I had always thought we communicated openly, but now I realized how blind I had been. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. He didn't care. Not like I had cared for him. I spent hours questioning everything. Our past, our relationship, my own worth. Was it me? Did I do something wrong? Had I missed the signs? I was consumed with doubt. Had I failed him somehow? Or had he just given up? My mind spiraled into a place of insecurity and self-blame. I had always prided myself on being a good wife, on doing everything I could to make him happy, to make our marriage work. And yet, it wasn't enough. The love I had given seemed to have meant nothing to him. But it wasn't just the divorce that stung, it was the way he chose to do it. Through a text. There was no conversation, no explanation, no chance for me to even understand why he was making this decision. It was final. It was cold. It was as if I was just another name in a list of things he was done with. I couldn't reconcile the man I had known with the one who had sent that message. There was no compassion, no empathy, no love. Just an empty text. A void that swallowed everything we had built together. In the days that followed, I felt more and more isolated. My friends tried to reach out, but I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't find the words to express what I was feeling. How could I explain the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak I was going through? I didn't know where to begin. The people around me were just as shocked as I was, but no one truly understood. It was hard to let anyone in. How could I let them see the vulnerable side of me when I was trying so hard to hold everything together? The worst part was the loneliness. The overwhelming, suffocating loneliness that seemed to consume me at every turn. I missed the man I had thought he was. The one I had loved with all my heart. I longed for the comfort of his presence, the security I had felt when we were together. But now, that comfort was gone, and I was left with nothing but memories and unanswered questions. I wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But I held it in. I tried to keep up appearances, to pretend that I was okay. But the truth was, I was falling apart inside. The pain was so raw, so real, that I could barely function. It was as if everything I had known about love, trust, and commitment had been ripped from me, and I was left standing in the rubble of what was once a happy, fulfilling marriage. As I went through the motions of everyday life, I couldn't escape the nagging thoughts that plagued me. How could someone I had given so much to, someone I had trusted with my heart, turn their back on me so easily? How could someone I had promised to love forever, someone who had promised me the same, just walk away with no explanation? I couldn't answer those questions, but as the days passed, I began to realize something. I had to stop questioning myself. I couldn't keep blaming myself for his actions. The pain was real, and the hurt was deep, but I couldn't let it define me. Slowly, I started to accept the fact that my marriage was over, and there was nothing I could do to change it. The healing process was slow. There were days when I felt like I couldn't take it anymore, when the weight of everything was too much to bear. But I started to learn something important. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean erasing the past. It meant accepting what had happened, painful as it was, and finding a way to move forward. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let his betrayal destroy me. I would find a way to heal, to rebuild, and to find happiness again, even if it felt impossible right now. The breakdown was brutal, but it was also the beginning of something else, the beginning of my journey to rediscover myself, to rebuild my life piece by piece, and to emerge stronger than ever before. The days following the divorce text felt like a whirlwind of emotional turmoil. I was trapped in a cycle of hurt, anger, disbelief, and self-doubt. Every moment seemed to stretch on forever, as if time itself was moving in slow motion. But my heart felt like it was beating too fast, like it couldn't catch up to the mess of emotions inside me. The pain was relentless, and no matter how much I tried to distract myself, it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. The hardest part was the feeling of complete abandonment. It wasn't just the fact that my marriage was over, it was the way it ended. Through a text message. He had chosen to make that decision without any consideration for my feelings, without any conversation, without any closure. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deeply hurt I was by his indifference. He didn't even have the decency to have an honest conversation with me. It felt like I meant nothing to him. A relationship built on years of love and shared experiences was reduced to nothing more than a few cold words on a screen. I found myself questioning everything. Did I not deserve better? Was I not enough? The doubts about my worth and the value of our relationship consumed me. I had given so much of myself to him. I had made compromises, put his needs before mine, and worked hard to make our relationship work. But it wasn't enough. The sting of that realization cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. I began to wonder if I had missed signs all along, if I had failed in some way to see that things weren't right. Was there something I could have done differently? But even as I struggled with these feelings, a part of me knew that the breakdown of our marriage wasn't entirely my fault. He had chosen to walk away. He had made the decision to end everything without even trying to talk it out. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how much I blamed myself, no matter how much guilt I carried, I couldn't change his actions. What was done, and I needed to learn to accept that. The loneliness that followed was unbearable. I felt completely isolated, like I was floating in a sea of emptiness. The man I had loved was no longer there to share my life with, to confide in, to lean on. And the worst part was that I didn't know who I was without him. I had spent so much time being a wife, so much of my identity was wrapped up in being married to him, that now I had to relearn who I was as an individual. The thought of rebuilding my life from scratch was daunting, but I knew I had no choice. I couldn't stay stuck in the past, even though every part of me longed to go back to the days when everything felt secure and whole. I also realized that the people around me, no matter how much they tried to offer support, could never fully understand what I was going through. They were sympathetic, of course, but they hadn't lived through the years I had with James. They hadn't shared the same dreams, the same plans, the same intimate moments. I couldn't expect them to understand the depth of my pain, and that made it even harder to open up. It was like I was living in a bubble of grief, where everything felt muffled and distant. In the midst of all this emotional chaos, I also struggled with anger. Anger at James for doing this to me, for being so heartless. I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand the depth of the hurt he had caused. But there was no point. Every time I tried to call him, he ignored me. His indifference was maddening. It felt like he had erased me from his life without a second thought, as if everything we had shared meant nothing to him. How could he just turn his back on me like that? I wanted to lash out, to demand answers, to make him feel the pain I was feeling, but all I could do was sit in silence. But as time went on, I began to realize something important. Holding on to anger would only keep me trapped in the past, in a cycle of resentment and bitterness. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be consumed by anger. I didn't want to let his actions define my future. It wasn't easy, and there were many days when the anger flared up again. But slowly, I began to let it go. I started to focus on my healing, on rediscovering myself, and on finding the strength to move forward. The self-doubt, however, was harder to shake. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who had been rejected, someone who wasn't good enough. My self-esteem had taken a massive hit. I had always been confident in who I was, but now I questioned everything about myself. My looks, my personality, my worth. The most painful part of the betrayal was that it made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't worthy of love. And that was a lie I had to fight against every day. But through all of this, I started to realize something powerful. This wasn't the end of me. I was still standing. I was still breathing. And while it hurt, while it felt impossible at times, I knew I had the strength to get through this. Slowly, I began to rebuild my confidence. I surrounded myself with the people who loved me, my friends, my family, the ones who had always been there for me. Their support became my anchor, helping me stay grounded even when the storm inside me felt overwhelming. I also started to focus on myself. I did things I had always put off, things I enjoyed, things that made me feel alive again. I took long walks in the park, read books I had been meaning to finish, and even took up a new hobby. It wasn't about filling the void that James left, but about rediscovering the parts of me that had been buried under the weight of a failing marriage. It was about remembering who I was before I became his wife and reclaiming my independence. The emotional struggle was far from over, and there were days when I felt like giving up, but I knew I couldn't. I had to keep going. I had to find my way back to happiness, even if it seemed impossible at times. And that journey, no matter how long it took, was mine to take. The turning point came unexpectedly. When I had reached a breaking point in my emotional struggle, I had spent weeks wallowing in self-doubt, in pain, and in a silent battle against my own feelings of worthlessness. But one day, as I sat in my apartment, staring at the walls that once felt like a safe haven, something shifted inside me. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't like a grand revelation, but there was a quiet moment of clarity, a moment where I realized that I had been giving all my power to the pain, to the betrayal, to the memory of James. And in that moment, I made a choice. I decided I was tired of letting this heartbreak define who I was. I was tired of letting the hurt consume me. I wasn't just going to sit in the wreckage of my past. I was going to start rebuilding my future, It didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't easy, but something inside me clicked. I had to take control of my life again, and I had to stop being a victim of my circumstances. It started with small steps. The first thing I did was delete all the pictures of James and me from my phone. It felt like a symbolic gesture, a way of severing the last remaining ties I had to a life that was no longer mine. It was painful, yes, but in a way, it also gave me a sense of power. I wasn't erasing the good memories. I was simply acknowledging that those moments belonged to the past, and the past was no longer my present. The next step was something I hadn't done in months: taking care of myself. I had neglected my physical and mental well-being for far too long. I had stopped going to the gym, stopped eating healthy, and stopped doing the things that made me feel good about myself. But now, I forced myself to take small actions every day. I started with going for a walk every morning, feeling the fresh air on my face, taking in the beauty of nature. Slowly, I felt a spark of energy return, and that spark was the beginning of my recovery. As the days passed, I began to focus more on my passions, things I had put aside for the sake of my marriage. I had always loved painting, but I hadn't touched a brush in years. I enrolled in a painting class and lost myself in the colors and strokes of my canvas. For the first time in months, I felt alive again. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about creating new experiences, new memories, new reasons to smile. I also reached out to my friends and family. For so long, I had isolated myself, unwilling to burden anyone with my pain. But now I needed them more than ever. They didn't judge me or make me feel ashamed of my heartbreak. They simply supported me, listened to me, and reminded me of my strength. I realized that I didn't have to go through this alone. I didn't have to hide my vulnerability. And in that realization, I began to heal. In the midst of all this healing, I realized something even more profound. I was reclaiming my identity. For so long, I had defined myself in relation to James, as his wife, as part of a couple. But now I was learning to define myself on my own terms. I didn't need someone else to validate my worth. I was enough, just as I was. And that was the turning point. The moment I decided to stop living in the shadow of my past. It was a moment of empowerment, of regaining control over my life. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew that I had the strength to face whatever came my way. I wasn't going to let my past define me any longer. I was ready to step into a future that was all mine, a future where I could find happiness again, even if it looked different from what I had imagined. For the first time since receiving that devastating text, I began to feel a sense of peace. I didn't know how long it would take for the pain to fade, but I knew I was on the right path. I was no longer bound by the heartbreak. I was no longer a prisoner of my past. I had taken the first step toward healing, and that step was all I needed to start rebuilding my life. The road ahead wasn't easy, but I was no longer afraid of it. The moment of clarity I had been waiting for came slowly, but once it arrived, everything shifted. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or some grand gesture. It was simply the realization that I had survived the worst part, the devastation of the divorce, the shock of James's betrayal, the crushing loneliness. These things no longer held the power over me that they once did. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I realized that I had spent so much of my energy fighting the past. I had spent days, weeks even, trying to piece together what had happened, questioning my worth, and clinging to the hope that I could somehow undo the damage. But that day, for the first time, I allowed myself to feel a sense of peace. I accepted that what had happened to me was not a reflection of who I was. It was just a chapter in my life. A painful chapter, yes, but a chapter that was over. For so long, I had been caught in the whirlwind of emotions, desperately trying to make sense of a situation that couldn't be understood. But now I realized that the only thing I could control was how I moved forward. And with that realization came an overwhelming sense of freedom. I stopped waiting for James to apologize or explain himself. I stopped hoping that somehow he would come to his senses and beg me to come back. I stopped imagining scenarios where he would recognize the hurt he caused and try to make things right. Instead, I began to focus entirely on myself. I poured my energy into rediscovering who I was, what I loved, and what made me happy. I didn't need his validation anymore. I didn't need anyone to tell me that I was worthy of love. I knew it now, deep in my heart. I decided to take a trip alone. Something I had always wanted to do, but never had the chance to. I booked a weekend getaway to a peaceful cabin in the mountains. The quiet, the solitude, the time away from everything and everyone. It was exactly what I needed. During that trip, I found myself at peace. I woke up each morning to the sound of birds chirping, surrounded by nature's beauty, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I felt like myself again, untethered from the heartbreak and the drama of my past. On the last day of my trip, while sitting on the porch watching the sunset, I realized something important. I was finally at a place where I could let go of the bitterness. I could let go of the anger. I could forgive James, not for him, but for me. I didn't want to carry that weight anymore. It had been weighing me down for far too long, and it was time to release it. It wasn't about absolving him of his actions. It was about freeing myself from the burden of holding on to the pain. I wasn't going to let him control my life anymore. I wasn't going to let him take away my happiness. The moment I decided to forgive him was a quiet personal victory. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't something I expected to happen overnight. But it was the turning point. The moment when I fully understood that my happiness and peace of mind were in my hands, not in his. When I returned home, I felt different, stronger, more in control of my life than I had felt in months. I still had moments of sadness, of longing for the life I had lost, but they no longer held the power they once did. I was ready to move forward, to embrace the future with open arms. I no longer saw myself as a victim of my past. I saw myself as a woman who had endured, who had survived, and who was now ready to thrive. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was the author of my own story, and I would write it the way I wanted. Looking back, I realized that the pain I experienced during those months of heartbreak was inevitable. It was a part of my journey, a test of my strength and resilience. At times, I thought I wouldn't survive the heartbreak, the betrayal, the feeling of being replaced and forgotten. But now I can say with conviction that I'm stronger than I've ever been. I had spent so many years defining myself by my relationship, by the man I thought I was meant to be with. But when that relationship ended in the most painful way possible, I was forced to rediscover who I was without him. I had to rebuild myself from the ground up, piece by piece, and it wasn't easy. There were moments of weakness, moments where I doubted myself, but I kept going. I found strength in the people who loved me unconditionally. I found healing in activities that made me feel whole again, whether it was painting, traveling, or simply spending time with friends and family who reminded me of the woman I had always been. I learned that healing isn't linear. There were days when the grief felt overwhelming, when the sadness hit harder than I could handle. But there were also days of joy, moments where I realized just how far I had come. Slowly, the pain became a distant memory, and I started to reclaim my life, my happiness, and my peace of mind. James may have shattered my heart, but he didn't have the power to shatter my spirit. I realized that I was worthy of love, not because someone else validated me, but because I validated myself. I was enough, and the love I needed to heal, the love I needed to move forward, was already inside me. The road ahead is still uncertain. There will be challenges, there will be more heartache, and there will be moments where I feel lost. But I know now that I have the strength to face whatever comes my way. I am no longer defined by my past. I am the woman who chose to rise above it, and that makes all the difference. This is my story, my journey of healing and growth. And as painful as it was, it's the story that brought me to a place of peace, self-love, and resilience. And for that, I am grateful. If you've been through heartbreak or betrayal, remember that you are not alone. Your pain doesn't define you. It's just a chapter in your story. If you're finding it hard to move on, take it one day at a time, just like I did. If you found strength in my story, please like, share, and subscribe to support this journey. You're stronger than you think, and you will heal. Thank you for being here and sharing this journey with me.